I'll just mention that there are a lot of apparent relationships between the mathematical model that I'm proposing and various Eastern mystical traditions, like Buddhism and Hinduism and so forth. It's not to my credit that I wasn't influenced by those. My upbringing was, my dad was a fundamentalist Christian minister, and that was my upbringing. I'm recovering. And so as a result, I didn't have much exposure to those traditions. But since I've had the model come out, I spent a long weekend at the Krishnamurti Foundation in Ojai, and talking with mystics across the table. Very, very, very useful. My attitude is, as a scientist, I need to be open to get ideas everywhere. And in particular, these traditions have been exploring consciousness for thousands of years, and so surely there are pearls of wisdom there that my colleagues who are physicalists and scientists would not have been pursuing because of their physicalist framework. And so I think the mystics have been ahead of us for millennia in exploring it, and science will have to catch up. On the other hand, what science has is this very rigorous methodology. And so that's what I'm hoping to have, is the best of both. Get the insights from the spiritual traditions to help provide the intuitions to develop the theory further, and then the rigor of mathematics and predictions, where the goal is to show where you're wrong. As long as we're willing to say, here's my ideas, but of course I can be wrong, let's test it, then we're on the same page. That's the only time we're going to learn. If we say, this is what I believe and that's it, that's when you stop growing. And so that, for me, the fundamental attitude of science is to be precise so we can find out precisely where we're wrong, and that way we can grow. So I want to take the best ideas and assume that no idea is true, including my own. We take the ideas and we push them as far as we can until they break. And then when they break, by the way, it's not a failure. It's like, okay, now we're going to learn something new. So that's my attitude about it. It is scary what's happening here with the climate. And I have a number of reactions on a personal as well as a scientific. I mean, I have grandkids that I love very, very deeply, and on a personal level, I would hate to think about them living in a world that's devastated by the heat and storms and flooding and so forth and famine. So it is very personal that way. One field that I study is evolutionary psychology, and it's a very powerful scientific discipline that, for the first time ever, we have a scientifically precise theory that predicts the logic of human emotions and why we behave the way we do. It answers the why question. Why do we behave the way we do? Now, I'm not saying it's all right. I mean, this is, again, it's a scientific theory. There's going to be problems. But for the first time, there's a theory that actually tries in a systematic way to answer the why question. And that theory actually does explain a bit the logic of human emotions and why we're so short-sighted. One thing that comes out of evolution by natural selection is that we're trying to, it's in some sense an algorithm that maximizes your local fitness or satisfies your local fitness. But 99% of all species that have ever been on the planet are now extinct. Evolution by natural selection is very successful for a period of time, and then every species goes extinct. That's what the fossil record shows us. And I'm not saying this to be a downer or to be pessimistic. It's absolutely critical for us to understand human evolutionary psychology and why we are short-sighted, so that we can then try to change the message and the social institutions in our country and around the world to communicate to people in a way that they will actually engage with their evolutionary psychology and engage with their emotions. so that we will change our behaviors. So so my attitude about this as a scientist is, by understanding human nature and not turning our eyes away from it, there's another attitude, by the way, that says that humans can do anything. You know, you're not constrained by your biology. The sky is the limit. And I think we need to understand that there are evolutionary genetic constraints on us. We can rise above them, but it's not easy. And looking at that squarely, looking at human nature squarely, will help us to devise social institutions and political structures that will allow us to intelligently engage with human nature and be able to try to answer these kinds of political and environmental problems. So I use evolution by natural selection a lot in my arguments, and I've just said a lot of nice things about evolutionary psychology. Now I'm going to completely change I don't believe any scientific theories, including evolution. It's the best theory we have so far, and so we need to use it. It's a beautiful theory, it's a very, very powerful theory, and I don't think it's the truth. But we don't have anything better. And it does give us far more insights than we've ever had before, so we've got to go with it right now. But as a scientist, I'm always looking for a deeper theory. I think that we will get a deeper theory of the evolution of consciousness. And in that realm, we may be able to see truths. I don't know. I'm hoping that we will be able to see truths in that realm. From the point of view of evolution by natural selection, it is a theorem that selection pressures are uniformly against us having true perceptions of objective reality. I've been working with Chetan Prakash and Chris Fields and a number of my collaborators on that. So if we just take the scientific theory of evolution by natural selection, it entails we will not see the truth. I'm looking for a deeper theory of the evolution of consciousness, which, when it projects into space and time, our space-time interface, it looks like evolution by natural selection in our interface. That's the goal. So evolution by natural selection will be a test for my deeper theory. If my deeper theory cannot give me back evolution by natural selection, then my deeper theory is probably wrong. And I need to revise it until I can show that it looks like evolution by natural selection. So it may be the case at a deeper level that we can see truths. And I'm hoping that's the case. But still, to your point, the fact that we are deceived here, and evolution by natural selection makes it very, very clear that deception is not the exception, it's the rule. And it's not only humans that deceive and lie, but orchids lie to bees. And they shape themselves to look like beautiful females. And the male bees try to mate, and they just get frustrated. They get a little pollen, and they go off to another orchid and try to mate, and they pollinate. So they're being used. And this is not the exception. It's the rule throughout nature that we have these interfaces that are finite, right, because we can't deal with all of the reality. And that means that you will have vulnerabilities because you don't see everything. You don't see the truth. And so evolution, but you can think about biology and evolution as really one organism trying to exploit the weaknesses in the interface of another, and then that that organism doesn't respond properly, it goes extinct. But if it can, its interface evolves, and it might then counter. And so you have this arms race among interfaces. So it's in that context of understanding lies and so forth, that we can then begin. First, we have to face that. We can't turn our heads away and say, that's ugly, it's horrible. I mean, we have to face that because in our social and political systems, that's what's programmed into us. And so if we don't look at that, we will not make the right moves. You have to look at the hard, cold facts before we can make good policy decisions to counter. Yeah. The 2 points being that, emotions for animals really are guiding their activities to survive, and if we don't have those same kind of drives in in AIs, maybe we're shortchanging them. Our AIs heretofore have had very limited goals built into them, but there's a new wave of AIs coming. There's a new framework that many are adopting in which the idea is to give them intrinsic goals. There's some work being done at USC on this, for example, University of Southern California. And the idea is to give richer and richer sets of goals and to also make the AIs fragile. Not make them made out of invulnerable metal, but to make them fragile such that if they don't behave properly, they will actually suffer and they will be injured, and to give them circuit feedback of their injury. And in that way, they'll be forced to learn goals, and they will learn like we do. You know, as little children are crying all the time because they bump into things, they try stuff, and it hurts. And as adults, that doesn't happen to us very often. We learned what not to do as children. But children is really, really tough. They hurt all the time because they're learning. The idea is to do the same thing with robots. And so there's a new generation of robots that's going to be coming out, I believe, that will do this kind of thing. Now, but the question is, from the physicalist framework, will they really be feeling? Right. So now I'm putting on the science hat now. My colleagues who say that the fundamental circuits in software are not conscious, they have to explain how building in these new algorithms that say, you know, don't do things that will break this limb, don't do things that will make you fall on your head and so forth. How does that kind of software turn into a feeling? And if from their framework, they need to give me a mathematically precise explanation about exactly what program is what feeling. And I don't think they'll ever be able to do it. Now, I'll also point out on the emotions of animals. My physicalist colleagues have a real problem that they have to explain, and that is, why did consciousness evolve? From an evolutionary point of view, right? Why would natural selection favor organisms with conscious experiences? Why can't I just go through life finding, you know, what works and doesn't work without having any feelings? You could imagine a robot that just gets feedback from an environment without having any feelings, just has these sensors but no experiences, and does the whole thing in the dark without any conscious experiences. Why did consciousness evolve? And it turns out that there are no good answers to that problem at all. None of my colleagues have a good explanation. They'll say things, well, like when you're in a novel situation and you need to explore a lot of different possibilities, that's what consciousness is for. Well, I can write search algorithms without assuming consciousness, and they can explore widely. That doesn't explain anything. And another problem they've got is most of my colleagues who are physicalists want only physical objects and entities to have causal powers. They need a causally closed physical universe. If they say that there is something called consciousness that evolved, consciousness itself cannot have any new causal powers over and above the physical system that it's in. If it did, that would be a non-physical new entity into the universe, and now physicalism is no longer physicalism, it's a dualism. So they don't want that. So here's the problem. Consciousness itself cannot do something new. It cannot itself have any causal powers. But if consciousness has no causal effects, then it can't be selected for. There's nothing for evolution by natural selection to operate on. So if consciousness is somehow being given rise to by your body, but consciousness itself can do nothing, then there would be nothing for evolution by natural selection to do to actually choose those creatures that have consciousness over those that don't. So there would be no selection pressures. So my colleagues have a real nasty problem. They can't solve it. They have no way to figure out how biology could give rise to consciousness, and if it gave rise to consciousness, they have no idea how natural selection could shape it. It could not shape it. So evolution by natural selection could not shape the kind of consciousness they want that has no causal powers. So they're in trouble. That's why I switched. By the way, I mean, I was a physicalist. It just didn't work. I had to move around. I switched to consciousness out of desperation.